know if they'll make it or not. So I took him home, fed him, we gave him a couple of shots, and he gave him several shots, and he said if he did, he'd bring him back there.
Yes, I'm counting at each one.
I went back and took my son back on Sunday, and I left the dog in the car, he wouldn't get out. And I said, hey, I took your dog to the vet and had a shot for him. He said, good. I said, but he's got a problem, and his diabetes and needs shots every day. He said, I was so nervous. I said, what do you mean? I will. You can have him. I can run walk out and get him. He is now 16. He was 7 then. He had been in a car accident when the first people had him, and his muscle had been broken and his tail had been broken. So this old man was shaking by the muzzle and his tail was crooked. Now, I realized he has no teeth on one side. He's got about 3 on this side. And bless his little heart, I was brushing him, and he has to wear a sweater because it's cold all the time. He and the underlay, and he's got a lot of furs on him, and it's always cold. So he wears a little sweater all winter long. And I took him out one day, and I brushed him, and I thought, there's a spot right next to his hip. I put my finger on it, and he kind of, so I took him to the vet. Well, my vet was there, so I took him to Ferguson. That cost you money, everything else. I mean, they're great people, and they're fantastic. So
my closest vet is unaffordable, so I
watch this, Jim.
To where?
Volunteer animal person. He's on my bed for 30 years now. And I took the dog, and I couldn't remind my vet was in Vanderbilt getting stem cell. I guess I took him to house. He had an ingrown hair that went right down the side of his hip bone. It was still working its way down and through. He said, it's so close. And she said, we got to get that out of there. So they took it out. It was like a little core all the way down. She said, I've never seen this before. So they took it out and they checked his teeth and they looked at the boy teeth. And I brought him home and he didn't want to come. Well, he kept getting under a chair and knocking the scab off on purpose. Well, I tried to teach him, and I since then found out you cannot use creatures on a dog. It's injurious to him. Didn't hurt him any. So then I got the know and I just poured it in the hole. He didn't have nothing left. He was fine. Now see, get looking like that. A week ago, I served that foil in the oven. I had a roaster, and I looked down and I picked it up and went, look how that's healed. I've got
every day. Together, but I did a printout.
So it's just Melrose oil.
Melrose oil from the essential oil company.
Essential oil company, because it also makes a difference who makes who produces
well, write it down so you can remember. It is MELROSE
right.
from essential oil.
Yeah, let everybody know that the publishing
excellent.
panel's starting.
Okay.
And there's food.
Well, I have a dog.
About that. It doesn't take much. Just a little.
Yeah.
And I just pour it and I dump it in her ear a minute now. Every so it runs down and I massage it in. So she will tell me now. She'll go rub her in there on the carpet until I like it.
Yep. Help me.
Yeah.
Oh, there's
You
are so kind-hearted. I was fortunate that one of our pony club kids back in my kids in pony club is now a veterinarian. And although she's now specializing in equine, she did small animal for a while. So I can get her to order me some of the meds that I need without going through my vet. And my vet will say $63 for the basic exam if we haven't seen it within the last 6 months, and then we'll order another $100 worth of meds. Sarah will get me the $20 worth of meds without, so it's 20 versus 160. So I've gotten real blessed there. And she'll come out and do my horses. She did 9 dogs, rabies shots, coming to my farm, $10 per dog. My vet. $30. Well, that's 20 times 9. That's $180 differential just on one shot. So it makes a difference where you go.
People will call me and I can tell them what happened to them. They lost it. They just died or where it is.
See, some of our rescues will transport a dog will get loose off rescue, and the communicator will be contacted to tell them where is that dog. Wow.
Sometimes
so are you also a writer? Because you're here today.
Yeah. I write murder mystery stories and I also people in aliens.
I don't know. I believe in a lot. I believe in higher forces. I believe in you what?
I was dictated a book by me.
Really?
Yeah, it's fun. I wrote my first book. It took me 5 years because my husband was dying. I had
there a way to do the front?
Get up and run. Like that. Like what?
Yeah, whatever
And
they.
I sat down and I had 3, 4, 5 subjects. And right now, I've got a lady who is in the type of one, but I can't really with my
See, you put the big one down and things fall over.
she's going to translate it for me, because I never put it on this recorder. And she's got one right now that she's finished. And I gotta put a copy of it for me. And now I've gotta find a publisher, which is one here.
Yeah.
And I've got another one.
That's kind of where we
I had a, my second one. And I am there. Just sitting. And I choose this. Why am I gonna do this?
I lost my pen.
Good afternoon. Wow, that's loud. This is the publishing panel, and we're kind of self-moderating ourselves. My name is Greg Lilly, and I am, let me jump this over. There we go. I have a company called Cherokee McGee, which is a traditional publisher. We're a small publisher. We have in print probably about 20 books right now. We do things like mysteries and literary fiction. And so I will be speaking today about that traditional publishing model. And next to me is Victoria Fletcher.
And I'm the owner of Hoop Books Publishing. I'm located at the Small Business Incubator in Abingdon. I consider myself more of a self-help, which means I self-publish authors, but I help them get from manuscript to the point where it's ready to upload to be published. So I kind of do all of the in-betweens.
And I'm Kathy Shearer. The name of my company is Clinch Mountain Press, and everyone says, "Oh, so how many people work there?" I also sweep the floor, wash the windows, and I self-publish. I do all the work that she so kindly helps you with, and so and I coach people. I do edit for a fee. I'm working on 2 projects right now, but it isn't something that I am looking for business. There's plenty of people out there who do that. I'm at the point where retirement's looking good. But I do encourage other people who have the desire to do it on their own. I'll be glad to tell you what I've done.
Okay, one thing that we have found, no matter how you decide you want to publish, is that you really need to have your manuscript in the best shape it can be. And that includes getting it finished, because a lot of people will come to us with ideas and say, "Oh, I've got this great idea for a book." And it's like, "Well, when can I see it?" And they're like, "After I write it." So that doesn't do us a lot of good. What we want to see are finished manuscripts, and one thing that that you need to think about as you write it, who are you writing it for, your audience? Because that really, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, but it really determines which model of publishing might work best for you. So on here we've got do your first draft. And like Linda Hoagland said earlier, don't try to edit as you write it, get it out. So create a really bad first draft. And then you can go back and revise it. After that, second draft, do it and revise and revise and revise. When you go to a publisher or a hybrid publisher or self, it's got to be perfect in your eyes. You have to think this book is ready. And then after that, get some fresh eyes to look at it. Hand it to a trusted reader. And they've got insights you'll never see. I mean, I've done things where I thought it was great, and then they come through and it's like, well, this character disappeared after the first chapter. What happened to him? In my mind, I thought I'd fix that. And Vicki, what other advice, what are some things you see that aren't quite ready when they come to you for help?
The biggest thing probably is the formatting. Most people just, type it in Word, and which is fine. And then I can do the formatting for them, based on the book size, what they want the chapter headings to look like, and the font of the actual book itself. I always try to use something that's very readable, for doing any of the books. So that's probably one of the main things, and the other one is probably cover design. We generally have to kind of thrash that out and see, what they've envisioned as their cover is. And generally, when I've read the book, I can give some examples, and say, "Ooh, how about doing something like this?" and letting them know a few options that they might have that maybe they hadn't thought about before. And so those are the two main things that come to me.
Well, I would stress what Greg mentioned already. Have a fresh pair of eyes. Take a look at your manuscript. You may think it's perfect after you've done revision number 15. But, for instance, for me, my go-to fella has been Larry Richmond. Some of you may know Larry. He's a retired English professor from the community college. And he just loves to read over manuscripts. It's just amazing. He welcomes them. And so my first book, which I'll talk about in a minute more, was about life in a company, Coal Town. And I had to be totally educated about this myself, and then I was writing these oral histories, and I was doing some explanation. And I would assume, for instance, that when I said that, well, Turner went into the mines that day and he lifted up his breastplate auger, and he did it, and Larry said, "What's that?" You assume after you've been in it for a while, everybody knows what you're talking about, but they don't, and it's going to be confusing. So it really helps to have somebody who maybe doesn't know anything about the area you're talking about, or B, knows a lot and says, "Oh, you got that wrong. You couldn't possibly have done that." So it helps to have people with expertise who are kind and going to help you out.
And I think that kind of touches on some of the differences we have in publishing models, where Vicki is looking at your manuscript and deciding, okay, well, this is the type of manuscript, type of cover that would work well. With my publishing company as a traditional publisher, I will take input from the writer, but it is the final decision of the publisher and the editor as to what the cover looks like. So a lot of those decisions, it's very collaborative with a traditional publisher, where you have much more control when you self-publish or you're publishing with assistants. So that's one thing to think about. I have hit writers that were control-oriented, and they would bring their manuscript in and they really thought that it was perfect and you could not change it. There was nothing. And I had one editor in tears from her writer, so I had to intervene. But it comes out, that's what the publishing contract comes up with. It's basically, as a traditional publisher, I have final say on it. And I've got the experience of putting out several books and knowing what the markets are and what the genres are. That's why I don't do science fiction, because I don't know science fiction. But with mystery and literary fiction, I have a good idea of what would work and what won't. So that's one thing. You really have to be collaborative with traditional publishing, whereas assisted publishing and self-publishing, you're in control. So that's one thing that is a big difference. And what we have here is something you want to think about too, is the audience. Who are you writing this for? You know, if it's nonfiction or fiction, who do you want to see it? For example, a lot of people do memoirs, or they're doing something for their family and friends. that's a perfect thing for self-publishing, because you know just about all your readers and you get to them. Specialized market, if it's for an industry, for example, out here we've got a couple of writers that write about the foster care system. If you're in that industry, you could probably do an assisted living. My mom is in assisted living. Assisted publishing. But you know you want a lot of control because you are the expert in that. And self-publishing, you can do that as well. And then genre markets. With the genre like romance, mystery, science fiction, you might want to search out a traditional publisher. And Vicki, what are some of the, when people come to you for help, who are they trying to reach?
Most of the time, they do have their audience in mind. I've done several memoirs, I've done several children's books just recently, and they knew, who they wanted that to go to. I'm just finishing up a project from a lady that did a poetry book when she was actually teaching school, and it was for students. And so she's been in contact with those students to get their permission to publish their work. And so she already has a built-in audience for that. And so it basically depends on the genre, like you were saying, as to what the best audience is going to be for that book.
Well, along those lines, I was very fortunate. I did not set out to write a book. The community where I was doing some community improvement work through People Incorporated came to me. And we started with a history project that was stories and pictures that were mounted on small quilts and moved around different libraries and community centers all about Coal Town life. This started in Dant, not Dante, Dant, in Russell County. And after we finished the history project, people started saying, "Where's the book?" And I said, "What book?" I don't know anything about a book. But they just pushed and pushed and pushed. So that I knew these were my folks. And when we had the big celebration of this book's appearance in 2001, the Dant Fire Hall set up the 300 chairs they had, and it was standing room only. I mean, those were my customers. So, and it's continued from there. The next town was Wilder, and they said, "You wrote that book about Dant, what about Wilder?" And I said, "Wilder's gone, there's no one there. We just moved down the road, come on." So, I've been very, very fortunate. They self-identify.
And another thing, what you need to do is when you think about your audience and getting to them for the distribution, because I know Amazon's got theirs. What's their publishing called?
KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing.
So Kindle Direct Publishing, and they do paperbacks with that and ebooks. Okay.
Yes.
Now I've got a new book coming out soon, and I've been checking around some of the bookstores, and that gets to be tricky with independent bookstores. Even worse with chain bookstores. To get your book in a bookstore is difficult. They want to use a distributor, and the distributor is Ingram that they use. So if you're going with an assisted publishing or self-publishing or a traditional publisher, check on their distribution, because if you want it in bookstores, it needs to be listed on Ingram. Also, Ingram, when they do that, they automatically go on Amazon, so you can do there. But a little tip I will tell you is that probably one of the worst places to try and sell a book is a bookstore, because there's so much variety. I mean, you got people walking in for the purpose to buy a book, but yet you're competing with a lot of different people there. My book, and we'll do this, we'll share where we sold the most books. I did really well at the Piccadilly that was in Bristol Mall. I set up a table there years ago, and I sold out. Where are some good book signing places for you?
Well, my first one was actually in the library, which is normally not the best place to sell a book, but because it was my first book and I was the local girl, selling books, and then the whole town came out and bought books, so that was a good one. But I have found some of the festivals and the larger events like that, and then at the Higher Ed Center, they have several different events throughout the year, like the Over 50 Expo, the Celebrate Women. Those have been really good events too.
One of my best venues we're sitting in right here. If you can get on Sunday with friends, that's been great. And I always have an event when a book is ready, comes back from the print shop, the printer, then I plan an event, and everybody who's in the book, whose family is in the book, I've kept a list of their names, their email, their addresses. I print out postcards like this with the cover picture, and then on the back it tells you contact information where they can find the book. I have a website, and I use PayPal. But also where they can come and meet us and see the presentation. I provide pictures, I have slides. I'm not just talking. And for them it's a reunion because they're seeing people maybe they haven't seen in a while. And most of my books are based in Russell County, so I always try to plan an event over there at the public library or somewhere that connects to their locality. And that's been my most successful place. And then internet sales continue from there because they hand out my cards, they hand out my postcards, and word continues. So many of these folks are our age, my age, but their children have moved off to the cities. And so that was one of the big pushes about getting a book, because I want to send it to my daughter who lives in Detroit, so that it travels through email.
And as you're writing and publishing, and we have to remember publishing is a business. I mean, writing is the craft and the art, but publishing is the business. So if you get turned down by a publisher, don't take it personally. It just doesn't fit what they're trying to achieve. When I was sending stuff out, my first 2 books I did were published by a small publisher in Texas. And the third one just did not match what they called their list. It was historical fiction. They didn't do historical fiction. So that's when I decided to create my own publishing company and learn from my first book on my own. So one thing you need to do is think about what are your goals, creative and business. Most people think about why are you writing, along with your audience. Why are you spending all these hours writing this down? Is it just to get the story out of your head and move on to the next one? Is it something you think people will learn from? I mean, these are all good things to really consider while you're doing it. You also have to think, I'll tell this story. In Charlotte, I used to live in Charlotte, and we had a critique group. And we'd been together for years, and a guy came in that had been laid off from Duke Power, and I think it's now Duke Energy or something. But anyway, he had gone through this traumatic event. He had, in college, dived into a pond that was too shallow, and he broke his neck, and he was paralyzed. And he worked through that. Well, now that he was laid off from Duke Power, he came in and sat down among these fiction writers and said, I'm going to write my memoir and tour the country as my new profession. And we kept ourselves from laughing at him because he just really thought he was going to make a living on his book that he had never written before. He hadn't started it. And that's hard to do unless you're famous. Now, if you're, an Olympian that had gone through that, yeah, you can do it. But this guy, he was a very good guy and great story, but he found that writing was harder than what he thought. He had seen people on TV, write a book and do it. and he had no idea. So again, it went back to that craft. He hadn't mastered the craft of just the basics of writing and storytelling, and he learned the hard way that it's not you sit down and write it in 6 months and then go on tour. It's a hard business. So you need to really think about money, fame, and fortune probably aren't going to be there. You have to do it because you love it. You have to do it because you love writing, you love telling stories. But another thing you need to do is also think about the future. Is it one book? You have one book, and that's fine if people have one book. But if you want to go forward, you build on each book. So you're only as good as your last book. So you don't want to just throw things out just to have it. You want to make sure it's well done. So what are some of the goals that people have when they come to you?
It probably is fame and fortune, but I tell them it won't happen. Maybe possibly someday you might get picked up, but the majority of the time you do have to love what you do. You have to love the writing and getting it out there. And I've always said, even if one person reads it and gets anything out of it, then my goal has been met, because that's it's what I feel led to do.
Well, like I said, in my case, it's the people pushing and who really want their stories recorded, the oral histories, the old photographs. And I have to agree with something Greg said earlier. Don't get stopped by somebody who's going to tell you this will never fly. I mean, keep trying. Hope that guy tried. Because when I was first searching around for how to get a book of stories published for the community event, I went down to a printer in Johnson City, Over Mountain Press, and they were famous for printing local histories. And I thought they'd be a perfect fit. And we sat down with the manager at that time, and he just shook his head. He said, "Look, I'm from St. Paul, which is just down the road from that. I will not publish a book unless I'm sure I can sell 1,500 copies. I'll never sell 1,500 copies of a book about Dane." Well, we sold 900 copies in 3 weeks. So, I've always wanted to tell him that. And it's been reprinted 3 times. It is sold as a community fundraiser. I don't own the book. It was owned by People Incorporated, and it is sold by the people in Dant to support their coal mining and railroad museum. And just this week, to just confirm what this has resulted in, I got a phone call. I listed on my website. I buy it from them to resell. I listed on the website. I got a call from a fellow in Atlanta, and he said, "My name's William Talford. I'd like to buy a book about that because some of my family lived there." And I flipped to the index, and I looked at page 123, and I said, "There's a William Talford. It's pictures in here, and it's a group of men sitting underground in a mine site where these people all survived a terrible roof fall that nearly crushed one of them to death." And he's in this picture. He said, "I have chills. That's my granddad. I never met him. I've never seen a picture of him." So this is the kind of thing that just keeps me going. I just have to keep doing this. Now, I've written 5 books of oral history, heavily illustrated with old photographs. That's what brings people in. These are not necessarily readers. They're not going to go to the library and bring home a stack of books, which I've seen many people do today, which is great. But they love their family history. And so I've stuck to that. It's worked for me. It is a lot of work. And you do spend hours and hours interviewing and scanning pictures, and in the old days actually taking your camera and photographing the picture. But it has turned out to really be well worth it.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've got one of my writers, Tracy Shawn, who did, get my fingers off of it, The Grayson Crows. She is a therapist that works with people with anxieties. So this is kind of her job. So instead of doing a textbook type thing, she wrote a novel that kind of illustrated, what people go through and how people get through those anxieties. And the book's done very well. So, if you do think, oh, I want to go something about my profession or my industry, you can easily fictionalize it, because people love to read about other people. So that is another way to go. If your work lends itself to something that not a lot of people know about, put it in a story and make it a novel. And that way people can learn something as they read too. That's what most readers say, is that they love to novel or nonfiction or memoir. They want to learn something after they finish the book. One thing everybody has to do is market. So marketing, as you go through, when you do your manuscript, think about, does it fit an established genre? So is there a specific subject it falls under? Because now if you go for an agent and the agent shops your book around to publishers, the first thing they want to know is what type of book it is and where it would fit on a library shelf or a bookshelf. We get a lot of people that say, oh, there's nothing like this. Nothing has ever been done like this before. Well, that's a problem, because Amazon doesn't know where to put it, the library doesn't know where to put it, and bookstores don't know where to put it. So it's best to say, oh, this is historical fiction, this is a romance, this is paranormal, this is young adult. There's some big category it's going to fit in, and that's what you need to think about as you're doing it. And of course, read in that genre. Read everything you can. If you're writing a romance, read every romance you can. Because there are certain expectations in these. Mysteries, we need to know who the killer is by the end of the book. That's just a given. We don't want to know who the killer is on page 2 and then spend the rest of the time in a courtroom drama. It's a mystery. You keep guessing till the end. So that's part of knowing your genre. Also, you have to self-promote. I don't care if you're self-publishing, assisted publishing, or traditional publishing. A writer has to get out and promote themselves. The days of Adriana Trajani being sent all over the world, those are few and far between. Most of us have never been on tour. Well, this is it. This is our tour. So you really got to self-promote. You've got to show up to the library, see if they can do anything, see if they've got a writer's fair like this that you can sign up for. Get out and go to the farmer's market, things like that. It's used to be people would put their books in their trunk of their car and drive around everywhere and just try and sell. Yeah. So those are some things to think about. The last one on here is, are you open to extensive revisions and edits? And that really kind of has you go into the different types of publishing. If you are not open to that, then traditional publishing is not for you, because it is a team effort. And you're going to have to be humble and say, yeah, maybe your idea would work. But on the other hand, you need to know when to stick to your guns too, because it is your work. So, if you've got a publisher telling you, I don't like that character, kill them off, or get rid of them, or combine these 3 characters into one, and that's not going to work for you. You need to stand up for it, and you might need to walk. It is your book in the end. But when you go with traditional, they've got the last sign-off on it. Now, I'll let Vicki talk about hers and how your suggestions are taken from, if you've got an author and you can give them a suggestion, how does that work?
I have been lucky or blessed, whichever one you want to call it, because most of the suggestions that I have made, the author has realized, oh, It would be better that way. There's only been a couple of times when they said, I'd really like to leave it like a habit. And I do that because it's their work. But I do make those suggestions and let them go with it.
And I haven't had to deal with this.
Well, that's good, yes, when you self-publish, it's your idea, you know, you take it all the way. But the thing comes up is that, again, when it's your idea, if it's wrong, then
That's right.
you own it.
You shouldn't have done it.
Yeah. And with traditional publishing, you can always say, oh, that publisher was such a jerk, he made me change it, and that's where all the reviews come in, that's what they criticize. So, next I thought we would go through, we've got plenty of time, and talk about our own experiences a little bit more and kind of getting published and lessons learned, maybe things that we've done there. I had started, my first two books, like I said, were published by a small publisher in Texas. The third book came up and it was historical fiction. And I was living in Arizona at the time, and the book's called Undercover Mode, and it was about a mail order bride in the 1890s. So I was living in Sedona, Arizona, and it was set in Jerome, Arizona, and that was like up on the hill overlooking the valley. And we were getting ready to move back to Virginia. And I thought, this book has got to be in this area because that was its market. So I was looking for publishers, and then I decided that I had the skills, because I had IT background, magazine background, and I was like, I'm going to do it myself. I saw what this small publisher did. So I did the exact same thing and started, got that one out, got it. I've actually got a distributor in Arizona that goes to all the gift shops and stuff like that, so it's all over the place there. But I learned a lot, and I made the mistakes on my own book. And then I started publishing other people's books, and that's what seemed to work well, because I might make $1 off their books, and they might make $1.50. But if you've got enough authors going, then that helps. And that's another thing to think about with traditional publishers. You might get 10% of the cover price. That's usually the royalty. With self-publishing, you get a lot more. So you've got to think about it, because with traditional publishing, with Cherokee McGee, people send me query letters, emails, and I look at it and decide if it's something that I understand that I could help market and put together. And if it is, I will offer them a publishing contract. They pay nothing up front, and we have the editors, the designers, we do everything, and then they start getting royalty when the book starts selling. So I've got a certain break-even point, a number of books they have to sell. If they do, that's great, and they've made their money back and helped make money for the next book we're putting out. But sometimes they don't. I mean, that's my judgment. I'll get some that might not make their money back and we lose money on it. But that's the gamble we're willing to take, and that's why it's difficult to get into a traditional publisher, because there's no money from the writer up front. All money is earned collaboratively between the publisher and the writer, and sometimes it doesn't work out, and we spend a lot of time and don't make any money. But it's a little bit different when you publish yourself, so I'll let you all talk about that.
Am I talking about publishing for other people?
I would talk about your publishing and then publishing with other people.
Okay, my own publishing, I used a traditional publisher for 5 of my books, and my other books I published myself. Of course, I had beta readers, to go through them and give me all the feedback and that before they were uploaded. But since I already knew how to do that, I was able to do it myself. Publishing for other people, when I first started, in 2012, I became just a proofreader and editor for people. And I did that for a couple of years. And, you know, several people had their books published after that. And then several of the Appalachian Authors Guild that I'm a member of started asking me to help them with getting books formatted. They didn't know all of the computer stuff. They didn't know how to do all of that. So I started working with them. And it just kind of progressed. Linda Hoagland, that led the the crafted writing workshop earlier, I've done 12 of her books. And she finally said after her last book, she said, you know, you need to become a business because you're doing what the authors need. You're taking their manuscripts and getting it to the publishing stage. And so there's a lot of people out there like me that can't do that you would benefit. So I did. And I just started project number 72 last week.
Wow.
Yeah, well, my goal with my books, of course, is to fill a need in the community that I see and that they feel very deeply, and also I want to at least break even. And of course, in self-publishing, the cost of the publishing is all on you. The cost of the printing, that's the big one. And it was certainly a learning experience for me. I was very lucky that I had my friend Larry Richmond as a coach. He had self-published himself. He's a poet. And he led me through it. Now, when I started working on this, I was still using WordPerfect. And if you remember WordPerfect, I loved it. It was just fine. And when somebody said, no, now it's time for Word, I said, what's that? You know, I'm real resistant to learning new programs. But if you are able to do that, then you can move forward. Computer skills are the main thing that a publishing company does for you, in addition to the cover design and everything, the formatting, that's critical. And if you feel uncomfortable about it, just find Vicki or find Greg, because it is a lot of work. But I felt from the beginning that this was something I thought I could accomplish, and so now I use WordPerfect. When I'm working on a manuscript, I set it up in Adobe. I used to use Adobe PageMaker, and then that transitioned to InDesign, so you had to learn a whole nother thing. It was like going from Greek to Italian or something. But you roll with that, and if you can, good. This is obviously, this would not be printed by a traditional printer. They would say, publisher, he would say, page limit, this is a 5-pound book. But I had a lot to say. But I was fortunate too in that for my very first book, I was directed by a local printing company. I went to the first printing company that the only one I knew, AAA here in Abingdon. And I said, hey, I've got a book that I need to get printed. He said, you're in the wrong place. I print cards, posters, flyers, whatever. He was very honest and direct. He said, you need to go to Innovate in Kingsport. They do a great job. And he was right, and that's where I went back in 2001. They are no longer in business, but the fellow who ran it at the end of its life, Eric Osborne, is still in business, and I can give you his contact information if you're interested, if you want to go down this route. Did a great job on this. There was a point at which, and there often is in the finished product, there was a glitch where several pages of several volumes had kind of like a smear of, it wasn't exactly ink, it was like coal dusted, typically. That's appropriate. It had been blown across the pages. I was still at People Inc. then, and he sent a whole crew of guys with erasers, I guess, and they just spent a whole day checking every single book and making the corrections, and they were able to fix it. I was very impressed. Then the second book that I published, and this was actually not mine, but for a very dear friend, retired coal miner Clyde Carter, who had a wonderful story to tell about living in a tiny little creek in the old farming days before Clinchfield took it over. And I should have gone back to Eric, but I was going to save money. I went to a printer up in Wytheville who said, oh yeah, I can do a book, no problem, great. got the book done, very reasonable price, had a wonderful celebration for the book at Clyde's church. He, as a retired coal miner, he then became a preacher, and unfortunately died a few days before the book arrived. Felt very sad about that. At the book celebration, I was feeling sad, and the ladies in the church said, "He sees this book." That made me feel better. But what made me really feel bad was, after about a month, I started getting phone calls. The pages are falling out of my book. And I said, "Oh God, what happened?" So I went back to Eric. Eric, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I went to somebody else. What's happened? And he said, he took a look at it and he said, paper has to be run the right way on a press to be bound the right way. Paper, the weaving, I can't describe it, but the fibers of the paper go a certain way, and that's how the paper has to be printed to be successfully glued together in the binding. And he said they ran it the wrong way. Fortunately, they reprinted the whole book. Gave me all new books, and I was able to replace the ones that had been damaged. So, lesson number one, maybe ultimate, is if you're comfortable with the computing part of it, you've got all that, get a good book printer and make sure they specialize in books. Forget the business card, pretty flyer people. They're not the ones you want. Eric Osborne is in Kingsport, and he does a great job. I do not get a cut of his business, so this is not pushing for him, but he's very reliable. He'll fix what's wrong, and I've used him since on other projects. Another thing is, set yourself up as a business legally. If you're doing this on your own, you want to be a sole proprietor probably. In Virginia and probably in Tennessee and other states, you just go online and you find out how to set up your business. And I pay $50 a year to the state of Virginia to be a sole proprietor. But definitely get yourself a business license and pay sales tax. Don't get caught. That's important. You've got to learn that system. Other than that, getting the word out, yes, we all need to do that. And those of you who don't feel comfortable managing a website, find your teenage child who will do it for you. Use PayPal. That's been my go-to online resource. I did sell through Amazon for a while, and it irritated me that they charged 50% back when I don't know if that's still the going rate, but they took 50%, plus I had to mail one book at a time as they got an order. And the last moment with them was when they contacted me and said, one of your books arrived damaged, we're sending it back to you at your cost. And I got it back, and it had tire track across it, where it had obviously been dropped in the warehouse and run across with a forklift or something, and I said, that's it, goodbye. No more Amazon. It's very fun. I know some people have had great experiences with them, but I did not. And that's probably the main thing, and I'll be glad to give coaching for free for anybody who wants more information about this journey. It's been something that's been very rewarding for me personally, and I have been able to break even and better on each of the 5 books that are my own books, and also the ones that the very few that I've printed for other people. So I feel very fortunate, and it's great to get the word out.
Yeah, and Kathy brings up some good points. If you're going with a traditional publisher, look to see what other kind of books they're printing, and look at the quality they're doing, especially for small publishers. You want to take a look and see what they have. So if you can go to the library and find some of their books, or go into a bookstore and look at the quality of their product. And also, if you are verbose and have a lot of writing, most traditional publishers have a word limit, because the way the books are priced is priced by the page. So, and they've got a price point that they want their paperbacks to be at and their hardcovers to be at. And if you were to come to me with 120,000 words, I couldn't create a book that would be sellable, because it would be, a paperback would be probably $30, and nobody's going to pay $30 for a paperback. So that's one of the restrictions, that when you work with a third or a second party of a traditional publisher, they've got word limits and they will make sure you stick to them. But if you've got something that just cannot be cut, then probably self-publishing is the best way, and you can kind of manipulate that price point for it.
And there's, you might wanna say something, but the quantity, printing, the printing costs vary greatly depending on the quantity. There's gonna be a price break. You may, with digital printing nowadays, you can order just a few copies online, whereas with this, you know, they gave me the various price breaks, and it was like, okay, it's gonna be X amount per copy for 250 copies, and then less for 500, a whole lot less for 1,000. They want you to order at least 1,000. So you've gotta be thinking about that, the investment, and then also where you're gonna store them. And it's important to keep them at 50% humidity or less. So we have a dehumidifier in our basement.
So it comes down to really what kind of process is going to fit you and your manuscript. Like I have on here, nothing is going to be an exact fit for you. So if you're shy and don't like to approach you know, companies to work with you to get it self-publishing and talk to people and get kind of trailblaze that path, it might be better to go with someone like Vicki that can help you do it and has been down that road before, or go with a traditional publisher where you just hand them the manuscript and you make revisions, and then one day it shows up on your doorstep finished and ready to go. You still have to go out and publicize it, but that's why nothing's an exact fit. So you've got to look at the pros and cons of each one for you and what you're working on. Secondly, the amount of control. You have some control, but not a lot with traditional publishing. The publishing house is taking it over and doing it. You have more control with self-publishing and assisted publishing. So if you're a control freak, that's probably the best way to go. And then also think about your upfront cost and continued royalties. Upfront cost for self-publishing and assisted publishing, you're going to have some money to get that going. With traditional publishers, you put no money in, but you don't get as much. It trickles out after the book comes, so it starts coming back in your royalties per book sold. Whereas the difference is you put a lot of money in self-publishing to get it going, and then as each book's published, you get more back per book. So, anything else you would like to add before we open it for questions? All right, questions? Yes?
You haven't said anything about copyright.
Copyright in the literary world, as soon as you write something, it's considered copyrighted. It's yours.
It's yours.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes,
You don't have to pay to get it done.
No, I send our books to the Library of Congress just so they have copies of them, and you know, so that goes in. But copyright, I'm trying to think. I don't think you have to. You don't have to do any registration.
There is a process by which you can, and I haven't done it in so long I can't remember. I did it with the first book because I was concerned about that. But it is your book, and you stand by that. And if someone copies in a way that you really don't like, and you know they claim it is theirs, not yours, if you want to take them to court, you can get a lawyer and do that. But I thought, I'll never do that probably.
But a copyright then isn't necessary?
I-
own part?
Right, probably. You know, not unless you really suspect that somebody's going to be stealing your manuscript and publishing it under their name, which is pretty unlikely.
Because I was given the information that you had to go to a lawyer and give them $350 to get a copyright.
You can do that if you want to. I don't think you need to.
I don't know.
You don't need to.
That's why I wondered.
No.
It's $25 to do it yourself at the library.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
Yeah, the Library of Congress would like to have a copy of your book. Yeah.
Can I add on to that? I've been researching agents. They do not like it if you copyright it ahead of time. They think it's distrustful and it shows that you don't know that it's already copyrighted. So don't write in big letters, copyright 2019, if you're sending it out to an agent or a publisher.
Yeah, I
It
did,
is
yeah,
copyrighted.
cause I
Don't
was
write-
talking to somebody and they said, oh, you have to go to a lawyer and send them $350, and I think, whoa, I don't know about
Well,
that.
I do write copyright with my name, blah, 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 and that it can be, brief quotes are permissible, but, I don't intend to go to a lawyer.
I have that same clause for my books that I publish. I have the copyright page and the clause saying that this, work is the sole ownership of the author and cannot be duplicated other than just short quotes and.
For publicity.
Exactly.
Do you do that too?
Yeah, what you realize is when you copyright it, it is the form that you've created. So if you've got a manuscript, that's copyrighted, but what we're copywriting is this version.
Yeah.
So, it's different than the one she sent me. So in a way, yes, she owns the copyright to that, but what I'm copywriting, and I copyright it under her name, is this version that we put together.
Okay. Sounds very reasonable.
So it's simple and free.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I wondered, because I thought, I haven't heard that before.
No, when you hear things like that, do a little investigation, because sometimes people might have heard it from somebody else and it's changed. Yeah.
So what is the role of the agent? I mean, is an agent necessary, or is there?
If you get into, right now, gosh, the big five, I don't know if they're still the big five or not, but if you want to get into the big publishers in New York, you have to have an agent. So
That's really the reason?
That's the only reason.
Okay.
And the nice thing is that, and they've got experience. So they know, just like a small publisher, they've got expertise. There's a lady in Roanoke that's an agent. She does pretty well, but she does a lot of cozy mysteries. And she knows the publishers, and if you can get her, she can probably find you a publisher if it's good, and she helps shape the book as well. But she also takes part of your royalty. So that's part of it. You get less royalty with the agent because the agent's taking a cut as well.
So does with traditional publishing, do they actually market the book for you?
No.
Okay, so because you mentioned that marketing before,
Yeah. They
Even
do.
the big five.
Yeah.
They'll do a little,
Okay,
Yeah.
not a lot.
Okay.
I just had a workshop on this.
okay.
They, really, it is your job as the author to do the marketing. And that is the hardest job that you'll have. The writing is your first job, and it's the one that is the most fun and enjoyable, and getting it ready and get it published. Then comes marketing.
Yeah, with us, we'll do things that help out that we know, or we've had a lot of experience in doing. So we'll do postcards and bookmarks, things like that we have all the graphics for. And we have done ads in certain publications. For example, I used to go quite a bit to Malice Domestic, which is in Bethesda, Maryland, and it's a mystery writers conference. And I would take out ads in the program for my writers. So the mystery writers, they would have a full page ad in the program because you were hitting 1,200 mystery readers. So we would do things like that. But as far as, setting up book signings, we're too small. We don't have the staff to do that. So we look to the writer to go out and do that. And they know their local newspaper. Now we'll help them do a press release. If they want to do a press release and send it to their hometown newspaper, we'll help them with that. But we're not on the phone, 8 hours a day trying to set things up for them.
And
What else?
I'm not pushing my Appalachian Authors Guild in any way, but I really am. But being part of a writers group, wherever you live in your community, they can really help you because they have people there that know the events, that know the things in the area that you could go to and sell your books. That's one of the things that we try to do for our authors, is to let them know exactly what events are coming up, where you can go. Do you want to sell books that day? You can sign up, and so it really does help to belong to a writers group.
I just wanna say something, this lady is very, very helpful. I happened to pull into a parking place in Abington, and her truck pulled up next to me, and I see this big sign across it, and I said, that's what I'm looking for. And she got back in the car, and I said, hold it, don't leave. So she gave me all of her information, and I could take down a little bitty card, and I was real surprised to see her when I walked in, but she knows a lot, and she's extremely helpful, and I appreciate all your help.
Oh, and before we go, I have submission guidelines if anybody's interested. I've got copies here of how you query Cherokee McGee and what we look for, and what should be in the query letter, all that kind of thing. And then Vicki, you've got some things too?
I do. I left them in the chair in the back. If you came in after we had already started, it gives you just a little brief overview of what Hoop Books Publishing actually does.
And I've got business cards if anybody wants to ask me questions about, you know, what I've done and my contacts, especially the print company that I use.
Do we have time for another question?
Sure, go ahead.
Who and how is the choice of title or use of a pen name determined?
Well, for traditional publishing, usually the writer decides if they want to do a pen name or not. Lots of times a pen name comes up if you're doing two different types of genres. So if you're doing serious nonfiction and then you're doing romance novels, you might want to have a pen name for one of them. Or if you're doing things that you don't want your neighbors to know you're doing.
See, that one of our authors at one of the tables has a pen name, and he said, I'm writing some really dark, macabre stuff, and I don't want feedback, so he's got a pen name.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't even thought of. Now, selecting titles, I would always wonder, how do you know if the title's already been taken? Is it legal to use
You
it?
cannot copyright a title. So if you wanted to do War and Peace, you can. Titles are not copyrighted. But song, and you need to think about this, if you are into music and you want to put song lyrics in, those are copyrighted. You have to get permission. You cannot do more, I don't know if there's a limit, but
There's a certain word.
I mean, like
can't
5
remember
words
what
or
it is
something.
now.
Yeah, so you just have to refer to, in one of my books, it was back when Sting had, you know, if you love someone, set them free. And what I want, you know, and I wanted, because I was a big fan. And so I had to rephrase it to say that the character heard Sting on the radio singing about letting someone go, just so I didn't hit any copyright issues.
Yeah, I used a coal mining song in a couple of books I've used too, and I go to the company that now holds the rights and I purchase it if I wish to.
Yeah, now there are public domain songs, like old folk songs that you can use. Yeah. But again, titles aren't copyrighted, so any title, I'm sure there's a bunch of books out there that have the same title, but it's best to try and find one different so it stands out.
Does an author propose a title and then a traditional publisher can veto it and say no?
Yeah, if in my books, the title I came up with was the one they used, and most of my writers that come to me in Cherokee McGee, they've probably got a good idea for a title. I think we worked on maybe 1 or 2 that we tweaked, but we didn't change it completely. But usually the writer's got a good idea. Yes, ma'am.
How about quotes at the beginning of parts or chapters of books? How is that handled?
Yeah, if you've got a quote to start off a chapter, I've seen that a lot. Again, if it's taken from a book that the author, I think the author's still alive or the publishing company still has it, there's certain thing about the copyright of it, it expires at a certain time. You would have to check to see. Now, like Bible quotes, go at it, you know, because it's hard to track those authors back down. But anything of a living author, be careful about that. You probably have to go to whoever published that quote to begin with and see if you could use it. But most people will use something like that. I had one writer that did mysteries, and it was the author was really into blues music, and she started each chapter with a blues lyric, and she went through a lot of trouble to get the permissions for that, and she said she'd never do it again.
So now if you have something like Vicky's or Kathy's books with the clause, short quotes, how long is a short quote?
Well, no, the copyrights that we have, it allows for, what do they call it, like critical editorial review. So if somebody's doing a review of your book, they can publish a section of it.
But I couldn't quote something that Kathy had in her book as a short quote to lead a chapter in something that I wrote.
Unless you got her permission.
Okay, so your general copyright clause doesn't cover when it says, you said you had the exception, short quotes are for the use of publicity?
Right.
Yeah,
So
that's only for
it's
reviews.
yeah.
Yeah.
Only, for reviews,
Yeah.
okay.
Right.
Yeah, if you're going to use it for your own, profit.
No, but if you cited, like her, the author.
But you still need their permission
Right.
to use it.
And
yeah.
I give you permission. Not a problem.
I just wondered how that
No.
worked, since we were
Is that
talking about
written
this.
permission?
Yes, you
Yes,
should
it
have
should
it
be
written,
written,
yeah, yeah, and hang on to that.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you very much, and if you have any questions, come on up, and we'll be here for a few more minutes.
Yeah.